Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Lyria Morwen froze when Azek Wolfheart's roar shattered the frozen night. She had taken only 3 steps from the Omega dens, clutching a rope bag filled with everything she owned, when the sound ripped through the air like a warning from the moon itself. The thin cloak around her whipped in the wind, exposing the truth of her attempt to flee. She knew he would not forgive this. She knew no one in Blackridge would, but she had hoped to slip away before anyone noticed she was gone. Now the pack gathered behind him, half awake and fully judging, their breath forming clouds that drifted like spirits above the snow. Shame pressed against her lungs. She did not turn. She did not breathe. She felt his footsteps strike the earth with force that rattled through her bones. When he spoke, his voice trembled with something dangerous. "Riven, hold her!" A surge of silver light burst forward as his wolf lunged. Before Lyria could react, Azek's wolf slammed into her shoulder. Heat exploded under her skin as fangs pierced her flesh, and a burning mark spread across her body, claiming her forever before she could even scream. The pain swallowed around her. Lyria collapsed to her knees, fighting the spinning world as the mark burned through her shoulder like fire trapped under her skin. The pack gasped, their shock cutting sharper than the winter air. Her wolf, Sarah, whimpered in the back of her mind, trembling beneath the weight of the forced bond. Lyria had always been invisible, overlooked, pushed aside, yet now she felt every eye fixed on her as if she carried a curse. She lifted her head despite the sting of tears, meeting Azek's gaze for the first time since his wolf struck. His storm-gray eyes were still bright with gold, the last traces of Riven fading but not gone. Rage, confusion, and something darker twisted in his expression, but nothing she could name. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. Azek did not answer. The wind tugged at his cloak as if urging him to speak, but he remained silent, staring at the glowing mark pulsing across her skin. The pack murmured in disbelief, stepping back as though afraid the magic might reach them. Sarah whimpered again, sensing the bond tightening. The weight of destiny pressed closer, suffocating her with its sudden, merciless grip now. Azek finally tore his gaze from her and surveyed the pack, his jaw tight as he issued a command that rolled through the night like thunder. "Return to your dens!" The words carried alpha power, scattering the watchers instantly. Lyria wished she could vanish with them, disappear into the dark before Azek turned back to her, but she remained frozen in place. When his attention returned to her, it was sharp enough to carve into bone. Her torn cloak lay at her knees, ripped by his wolf's fangs, a reminder of the violence that bound them. Azek did not reach for her. He only stared, breathing hard. "You tried to leave," he said, not as accusation, but as truth. Lyria swallowed the ache rising in her throat. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "I never have." The wind rushed between them, carrying the scent of frost and pine. Azek's eyes flickered, a sign that Riven lingered beneath the surface. "The mark says otherwise." His voice held no cruelty, only a roughness she didn't understand. Still, uncertainty shadowed his features, as though he questioned the force driving him tonight, more than he questioned her desperate attempt to escape in the darkness. Lyria pushed herself upright, though her legs trembled beneath her as if unsure they could hold her weight. The mark burned hotter with every breath, radiating through her arm and settling like molten metal beneath her skin. Azek stepped forward instinctively, but she jerked back, raising her hands as though he were a wildfire she could not allow to touch her again. He halted immediately, tension rippling through his frame. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered. "Alphas don't mark Omegas." His eyes darkened as Riven stirred again. "Riven didn't give me a choice." The confession rattled through her. Wolves did not act without their human half's consent unless something ancient and undeniable took hold. "Why me?" she murmured. Azek inhaled sharply, struggling for words. "I don't know." The honesty shook her more than the cold. "But the bond is real." Sarah whimpered inside her, frightened yet drawn toward the warmth threading through the connection. Lyria felt trapped between fear and a strange pull she did not understand, a quiet warmth spreading despite everything she wanted to resist. The night pressed close around them, urging answers neither of them could give, binding them with threads neither could break, not yet. The silence between them deepened, broken only by a distant howl rising from the hollow pines, echoing through the frozen trees like a warning. Lyria wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shield the shaking that overtook her. "Staying here was killing me," she whispered. "I can't be what this pack wants." Azek stepped toward her again, slower this time, careful. "You are not nothing." The words hit harder than she expected, stirring feelings she couldn't allow. She shook her head. "You marked me without asking." He did not deny it. Instead, he said, "And I will learn why Riven chose you." The certainty in his voice unsettled her. Sarah stirred uneasily, torn between fear and reluctant hope. Azek extended his hand, not touching her, merely offering, "Come inside before the cold takes you." Lyria stared at that hand, uncertain. The night felt too wide, too sharp, yet the thought of collapsing alone in the snow terrified her more than anything Azek could do. She stepped forward, not accepting his hand, but allowing herself to walk beside him. The mark throbbed warmly beneath her torn cloak, glowing faintly like a promise she wasn't ready to face in the days ahead. Dawn had not yet touched Blackridge territory when Lyria awoke to the aching throb of the fresh mark on her shoulder. The dim interior of the Omega barracks felt colder than usual, shadows stretching long across the stone floor as if trying to reach her. She lay there for a moment, staring at the wooden beams above, listening to the quiet breathing of the others asleep. None of them knew what had happened in the night. None had seen Azek's wolf claim her beneath the moon, binding her to a fate she had never asked for. Sarah shifted inside her, restless and uneasy, as though the bond tugged at her spirit with invisible threads. Lyria pressed a hand over the mark, feeling the warmth still radiating from it. Memories of the night flooded back, Azek's roar, the pack's shocked whispers, the searing pain. Shame tightened in her chest. She had tried to leave quietly, to disappear without disturbing the order of the pack, but destiny had caught her in its jaws. Now she lay trapped in the place that had always rejected her, carrying a mark that would only make her more hated. She exhaled, knowing nothing would be the same. Hours earlier, before the moon reached its highest point, Lyria had stood alone at the Emberline River with her bag clutched tight against her chest. She had planned every step of her escape for months, collecting scraps of food, stitching a sturdier cloak, learning the patrol routes by listening from the shadows. No one noticed an Omega slipping between trees. No one cared enough to ask where she went. The river had glittered under the moonlight, a shimmering path to freedom if she could only cross it. Sarah had urged her forward, whispering that they could start anew, far from Blackridge's harsh rules. But as Lyria stepped into the icy water, a howl rose behind her. Azek's howl, raw and furious, shaking the forest. She had frozen, heart pounding, as the air shifted violently. A force rolled through the woods, ancient and wild, something she felt before she heard the crashing footsteps. She had run, but not fast enough. Riven had burst through the tree line moments later, eyes blazing with gold fire, and destiny had closed its jaws around her. Now, remembering that moment, Lyria felt the same fear pulse through her again as the bond tugged sharply at her soul. Azek Wolfheart had not slept. While the pack slumbered, he remained in Moonspire Den, pacing before the dying embers of the hearth. His thoughts warred with Riven's instincts, each pulling him in opposite directions until his chest ached. He had not meant to mark her. He had not even known her well enough to speak more than a handful of words to her in years. Yet the moment he sensed her crossing the boundary, something inside him snapped loose. Riven had surged forward with a force Azek could not restrain, howling one word in his mind: mine. Azek hated the word, hated how it echoed now with painful clarity. He raked a hand through his hair, the memory burning behind his eyes. He had seen Lyria collapse when his wolf struck her, seen the terror in her face, and still, Riven had pushed him closer, demanding the mark be completed. Azek cursed under his breath. An Omega should never have been chosen. The pack would revolt if they learned the truth. Eldrick Harrow, his beta, already suspected something was wrong. A bond formed by instinct alone was dangerous. Ancient magic awakened only in times of crisis. But the crisis had begun. Back in the Omega barracks, Lyria forced herself to sit up as the others stirred awake. None of them approached her. Whispers drifted like smoke, thin and sharp, carrying fear she had known her whole life. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, hiding the glow of the mark beneath her cloak. Sarah paced anxiously in her mind, wanting to speak but unable to calm the storm they shared. When Tala Winter, the only person who had ever shown her kindness, stepped forward, Lyria braced herself. Tala's eyes widened, not in disgust but in shock. Lyria. What happened? Lyria opened her mouth, but no words came. The memory of Azek's fangs burned too vividly. Tala's gaze dropped to the faint shimmer beneath Lyria's collar. Her breath caught. No, he didn't. Lyria flinched. Tala stepped back as if the air itself had cracked. The Alpha marked you? Lyria hugged her arms around herself, unable to answer. The room fell silent, the cold wind outside holding still. For the first time, Lyria realized her fate was not the only one at risk. The pack would never accept this. And Azek, he had tied them both to a storm neither could control. When Lyria finally stepped outside, the morning sun had begun to rise, turning the snow-dusted ground into a field of pale gold. She wrapped her cloak tighter, hoping the fresh air would steady her racing mind. But the bond pulled with every step, tugging her toward Moonspire Den like a thread woven through her bones. She tried to resist it, tried to breathe past the invisible pressure, yet each breath only tightened the strange warmth coiling inside her. Sarah whimpered softly, confused by the instinct drawing them closer to the very Alpha they feared. Lyria followed the path toward the training yard, hoping movement would clear her thoughts. Instead, she found Bram Ashfall standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on her as though he had been waiting. His stare held no hatred, only worry. "You should be careful," he murmured. "The pack is already whispering." Lyria swallowed hard. "About me?" Bram hesitated. "About what it means." She felt a chill crawl down her spine. This bond threatened more than her freedom. It threatened the fragile balance of Blackridge itself, and she had no idea how to stop what had already begun. And soon, its consequences would spread wide. Lyria Morwen froze when Azek Wolfheart's roar shattered the frozen night. She had taken only 3 steps from the Omega Dens, clutching a rope bag filled with everything she owned, when the sound ripped through the air like a warning from the moon itself. The thin cloak around her whipped in the wind, exposing the truth of her attempt to flee. She knew he would not forgive this. She knew no one in Blackridge would. But she had hoped to slip away before anyone noticed she was gone. Now the pack gathered behind him, half awake and fully judging, their breath forming clouds that drifted like spirits above the snow. Shame pressed against her lungs. She did not turn. She did not breathe. She felt his footsteps strike the earth with force that rattled through her bones. When he spoke, his voice trembled with something dangerous. "Riven, hold her." A surge of silver light burst forward as his wolf lunged. Before Lyria could react, Azek's wolf slammed into her shoulder. Heat exploded under her skin as fangs pierced her flesh, and a burning mark spread across her body, claiming her forever before she could even scream. The pain swallowed around her. She feared the bond might shatter her resolve long before reaching the den. Azek stood at the far end of Moonspire Den, palms pressed against the cold stone wall as he tried to steady Riven's restless presence. The wolf prowled beneath his skin, claws scraping against the edges of his mind every time Lyria drew near. Azek cursed under his breath, fighting the urge to shift. He could feel her moving closer, each step echoing through the bond like a drumbeat. He hadn't summoned her, yet the connection tugged her toward him anyway. Eldrick Harrow lingered near the entrance, arms crossed, watching with thinly veiled concern. "You didn't sleep," Eldrick said quietly. Azek ignored him, jaw clenched. He didn't want to explain what he didn't understand. Riven growled again, pushing forward as if demanding Azek abandon restraint entirely. Azek shoved back. "She shouldn't be coming here," he muttered. "Not today." Eldrick raised a brow. "And yet she is." Azek's breath tightened. Something in the bond had shifted overnight, turning heavier, deeper, more volatile than any connection he had witnessed. If Lyria arrived now, the pack would notice the tension cracking through him. They would sense the instability, and instability in an alpha meant danger. He feared Riven might break free before Azek regained command. Lyria reached the base of Moonspire Den with her heart pounding, and the bond pulling so fiercely she felt unsteady on her feet. The stone steps leading upward glistened with frost, each one catching the morning light like shards of glass. She hesitated at the first step, Sarah pacing anxiously inside her mind. "We shouldn't be here," Lyria whispered, but the bond tugged again, stronger, almost insistent. She climbed. With every step, warmth spread across her chest, not comforting, but dangerous, like embers threatening to flare into fire. When she reached the entrance, she paused, breath clouding in the cold air. She could feel Azek on the other side of the wall, feel the tension twisting inside him. The sensation rattled her. She didn't want to feel anything tied to him. As she stepped inside, Eldrick Harrow turned sharply, eyes widening with surprise. "You came!" Lyria stiffened under his gaze. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. Her voice trembled. "I didn't have a choice." Eldrick's expression darkened, confirming he suspected more about the bond than he admitted aloud. The air thickened as Azek turned toward her presence, the tension spiraling tighter with every passing heartbeat between them now. Azek turned as Lyria stepped fully into the den, his posture rigid, his eyes flashing with the gold of a wolf barely held in check. The moment their gazes met, the bond snapped taut between them, tightening like a rope pulled from both ends. Lyria staggered slightly under the force of it, her breath catching. Azek inhaled sharply, as if the sight of her triggered something uncontrollable. Riven pushed hard against him, claws scraping, demanding release. Azek's hands curled into fists. "You shouldn't be here," he said lowly, voice strained. Lyria swallowed, wishing she could flee, but the bond allowed no distance. "I didn't choose to come," she whispered. Eldrick shifted beside them, eyes flicking between their tense forms. "This is getting worse," he muttered. Azek ignored him, stepping closer despite Lyria's flinch. The air rippled with heat. "The bond is unstable," he said, forcing each word through clenched teeth. "If Riven pushes through—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lyria felt the danger thrumming through the room, the threat of a shift that could destroy everything. The mark on her shoulder burned, responding to his turmoil in a way that terrified her. She feared his wolf breaking free. Lyria stumbled back as the bond surged again, stronger than before, sending a wave of heat spiraling through her veins. The room felt too small, the air too thick, every sound drowned beneath the pounding of her heart. Azek moved toward her slowly, fighting each step as if dragging his body through chains. "Lyria," he said, voice rough, almost pained. Hearing her name in that tone sent a shiver through her spine. Sarah whimpered, torn between fear and the instinct to move closer. Eldrick stepped forward, ready to intervene if the Alpha lost control. "You need to calm the bond," he warned. Lyria shook her head helplessly. "I don't know how." Azek exhaled sharply, struggling to hold himself together. "Then we find a way." His gaze locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. "Because if we don't, this will consume us both." The words struck deeper than she expected. She felt the truth in them, felt the bond tightening, demanding, calling for something neither of them understood. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her shaking breath as the mark blazed painfully. Outside, a distant howl echoed through the pines, warning that their time to hide truth was ending. The morning air bit sharply at Lyria's skin as she made her way toward the outer edge of Blackridge, desperate for a moment of space away from the den. The bond had quieted slightly after the confrontation with Azek, but the silence felt deceptive, like the pause before a storm detonated. Frost clung to the branches overhead, shimmering in the pale light. Lyria wrapped her cloak tighter, trying to steady her thoughts, yet the memory of Azek's strained voice still echoed within her. Sarah hovered at the back of her mind, alert and unsettled. Lyria had rarely heard her wolf this unsure, and the uncertainty twisted uneasily in her chest. She wanted distance, even if only for a moment, distance from the den, from the pack, from the impossible tension crushing her ribs. But the bond followed her like a shadow, never loosening, never allowing her steps to be her own. She stopped beneath a cluster of frost-laden pines, breath clouding in the cold. She pressed a hand over the mark through her cloak, hoping in vain to quiet the pulse that lived there. Nothing changed. Instead, the warmth beneath her fingers grew stronger, as though reacting to her racing heartbeat, uncertain but listening. Azek hadn't intended to follow her, yet the bond dragged him down the forest path, as though pulled by invisible chains. He cursed under his breath, boots crunching through the frost, while Riven pressed relentlessly against his control. The wolf wanted near her, needed near her. Azek fought the instinct with everything he had, but the pull grew stronger with each passing second. Eldrick had warned him earlier that the pack was on edge, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. News of Lyria's arrival at the den had already sparked tension. If the pack discovered how violently the bond surged between them, chaos would follow. Azek pushed forward, determined to reach her before fear or gossip consumed everything. The task felt impossible, yet he didn't stop moving. His breath fogged the air in sharp bursts, every inhale laced with the scent of her trail. Riven growled deep in his chest, urging him to move faster, to close the distance before something, or someone, interfered. Azek clenched his jaw and lengthened his stride, fighting instinct and fear alike, knowing he had only moments before the pack's suspicions spiraled into danger he could no longer contain. He feared Riven might break free before Azek regained command now. Lyria stopped at the edge of the hollow pines, the forbidden forest looming before her like a curtain woven from shadow and silence. Even from here, she felt the ancient magic humming beneath the earth, a low vibration that made Sarah shift uneasily. Few wolves entered this place willingly. Fewer returned unchanged. Lyria wasn't planning to go inside, only breathe near something that wasn't shaped by Blackridge's expectations. She leaned against a fallen trunk, closing her eyes as the cold wind traced along her cheeks. For the first time since the attack, she felt a thin sliver of peace. The forest didn't judge her. It didn't whisper cruel things. It simply existed. She inhaled deeply, letting her heartbeat slow, letting the fear inside her unwind just slightly, as the air around her carried whispers of forgotten legends. She didn't hear Azek approach until the bond jolted sharply, warning her mere moments before his footsteps broke through the quiet forest air now. Azek emerged from the trees with tension carved into every line of his body, his breath sharp in the cold air as his gaze locked instantly onto Lyria. The bond snapped tight once more, sending a heavy wave of heat rolling through them that made her stagger. She tried to step back, but the pull anchored her in place, as if the forest itself demanded she stay. Azek lifted a hand slightly, not touching her, but steadying the air between them. "You shouldn't be this close to hollow pines," he said, voice low, strained. "It's dangerous for anyone, but with our bond in this state—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening as Riven surged violently inside him. Lyria swallowed hard, feeling the force of the struggle deep in her own bones. "I just needed air," she whispered. "I needed to think." Azek exhaled sharply, the sound half frustration, half fear. "You can't outrun the bond. Not now." His voice softened unexpectedly. "And you shouldn't have to face this alone." She blinked at him, startled by the vulnerability threading through his tone. The forest creaked around them, branches trembling as if listening. The bond pulsed again, warning and demanding all at once. Far dangerous here now. Lyria's pulse hammered as the shadows in the hollow pines shifted subtly, responding to the rising tension between her and Azek. She tried again to pull away, desperate for distance, but the bond dragged her closer instead, tightening like a living rope woven from instinct. "This can't keep happening," she whispered, breath trembling. Azek nodded once, jaw clenched as Riven pushed violently beneath his skin. "I know," he said. "If it escalates again, it could trigger a full shift." The thought made Lyria's stomach twist. If Azek shifted here, with the forest's magic awake and watching, there was no telling what might follow. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the mark on her shoulder pulsed fiercely, reacting to Azek's nearness like a second heartbeat. "Then how do we stop it?" she asked. Azek stepped closer, moving slowly, deliberately, as if trying not to ignite another surge. "We stabilize it," he said. "Together." The word struck her like a spark in dry tinder. Their eyes met, and for a moment the bond eased, softening instead of tightening. But the forest stirred again, the wind sweeping through the pines with a warning whisper. The mark burned hot beneath her skin, the forest watching them with ancient, waiting silence. The sky darkened earlier than expected as Lyria returned to the heart of Blackridge, a heaviness settling over the territory that made every wolf pause in uneasy silence. She felt it first through the bond, an unsettling tremor that pulsed from Azek's direction, sharp enough to steal her breath. The mark on her shoulder throbbed in warning. Sarah stirred nervously, pacing in circles inside her mind as if sensing danger slithering closer with every passing moment. Lyria quickened her steps, the cold wind biting at her cheeks. She had barely recovered from the encounter at Hollow Pines, yet the bond tugged again, harder than before, urging her toward the training yard. Voices drifted from the open field, tense and raised, carrying notes of alarm. As she approached, she spotted a gathering of warriors surrounding someone collapsed on the ground. Her heart lurched. She recognized Azek instantly, his body half-tensed as if fighting off an unseen force. Ripples of unstable energy flickered around him. The pack dared not touch him. Lyria's pulse thundered. Something was wrong. Worse than anything they had faced yet. Every instinct in her screamed to reach him, to stop the spiraling energy before it shattered what little control remained. Azek crouched in the dirt, One hand braced against the ground as Riven snarled inside him with a fury that threatened to tear through his skin. The unstable bond with Lyria pulsed wildly, surging like a living storm he could no longer contain. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, each inhale a battle against the shift, forcing its way upward. Eldrick stood nearby, barking orders to keep the warriors back. No one dared get close. No one except the one person the bond demanded. Lyria broke through the line without hesitation, her heart racing, but her steps steady. The moment she crossed into Azek's immediate presence, the chaotic energy shifted, drawn to her like iron to a magnet. The warriors gasped as the air crackled around them. Azek's fingers dug furrows into the earth, fighting a losing battle against the transformation threatening to take him. Riven's growls vibrated the ground beneath him. Eldrick met Lyria's eyes with a grim nod, silently urging her forward. She swallowed hard, knowing her presence was the only thing capable of cooling the raging bond. Terror twisted in her chest, yet she moved, because the bond left her no other choice now. Lyria dropped to her knees in front of Azek, the ground freezing beneath her palms as she reached toward him without touching. The bond roared. Between them, a torrent of heat and pressure slamming into her chest so forcefully she gasped. Azek's eyes snapped open, glowing with a feral brilliance that sent a shiver racing down her spine. "Lyria," he rasped, voice fractured. Riven's presence swirled fiercely behind his gaze, desperate and unstable. Lyria steadied her breathing, letting Sarah rise just enough to lend strength without losing control. She whispered his name softly, grounding him with the sound. The violent tremor running through him slowed, but only slightly. The bond surged again, tightening around them both until she felt her bones vibrate with the force of it. She didn't dare touch him. One wrong move might trigger a shift neither of them could stop. Instead, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Azek, stay with me." His breath hitched, the wolf inside him raging, torn between surrender and recognition. Lyria felt the turmoil as though it were her own, every pulse of fear and instinct crashing through their shared connection now. Azek's body lurched forward, his fingers clawing at the ground as Riven surged with sudden violence, forcing a guttural snarl from his throat. Lyria flinched but didn't retreat. The bond yanked her closer, pulling her into the storm of heat and trembling energy. The warriors around them stepped back in fear as Azek's bones cracked audibly beneath his skin. A partial shift. Not controlled. Not safe. Eldrick shot Lyria a tense look. "Talk to him. Anchor him," he barked. Lyria swallowed her fear, leaning in despite every instinct urging her to run. "Azek," she said, voice shaking but firm. "Fight it. Don't let Riven take over." Azek bared his teeth, eyes blazing gold, breath coming out in ragged bursts. I can't." His voice twisted, half human, half wolf. The bond surged harder, nearly knocking Lyria back with the force of it. She braced herself, letting Sarah rise inside her, pushing courage into her trembling limbs. "Yes, you can," she whispered. "You're stronger than this. Stay with me." Azek's gaze flickered, recognition breaking briefly through the haze. Riven snarled, but hesitated, and for the first time since Lyria arrived, the violent energy shuddered instead of exploding, fighting for control her now. Lyria leaned in until her forehead nearly touched Azek's, her breath mingling with his as the bond roared like wildfire between them. Her heart thundered painfully, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. The bond held them locked together, forcing their energies to collide and merge in chaotic waves. "Azek, listen to me," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "You're not alone. I'm here. I'm not leaving." The words snapped through the haze clouding his eyes. Riven's snarl faltered, breaking just enough for Azek to gasp a breath. The golden glow flickered, then dimmed, shifting back toward storm gray. Lyria felt the change instantly. The pressure around her ribs eased, the violent heat receding into a trembling warmth. Azek's muscles shuddered, then slowly relaxed beneath the strain. "Lyria," he rasped, this time fully himself. She exhaled shakily, relief flooding her. The warriors watched in stunned silence as the chaotic bond finally settled into something steady, fragile, but undeniably connected. Azek lowered his head, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his temples. "You stopped it," he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. Lyria didn't trust herself to answer. She simply stayed close, feeling the bond hum with exhausted calm, giving Azek the opening he needed to breathe again. The storm that had been threatening the horizon finally broke over Blackridge that night, thunder rumbling through the mountains like an ancient beast awakening. Lyria stood beneath the overhang outside the Omega quarters, staring at the darkened sky as rain hammered the earth in relentless sheets. The bond pulsed softly inside her, calmer than earlier, but far from settled. She pressed a hand to her shoulder, feeling the lingering heat of the mark. Ever since stabilizing Azek's shift in the training yard, something between them had changed, subtle but undeniable. Sarah paced restlessly, murmuring that Azek was unsettled, his emotions flickering through the bond like distant lightning. Lyria exhaled, the cool air brushing her damp cheeks. She had told herself she wanted distance, but the bond's quiet tug reminded her that distance was no longer an option. A faint glow flickered from the path leading toward Moonspire Den. Footsteps approached, heavy but controlled. Her heart lifted and tightened all at once. She knew the rhythm of that stride. Azek appeared through the curtain of rain, drenched and unguarded, his expression carved with something she couldn't decipher. He stopped a few paces away, breath misting in the cold night air, watching her. Azek didn't speak at first. He merely stood there, as if searching for words that refused to form. Rain streamed from his hair, dripping down the strong lines of his jaw, soaking the dark fabric of his clothes until they clung to him like a second skin. Lyria's breath caught as the bond fluttered, carrying a wave of emotion she couldn't parse. Regret, anger, fear, something deeper. Riven paced inside him, unsettled but not violent, as though the earlier struggle had left the wolf wary. At last, Azek stepped closer, his voice low. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Lyria swallowed, unsure how to answer. "I needed air," she said softly. "I can't breathe inside the den right now." His brows tightened. "Because of the bond?" Lyria hesitated, then nodded. Azek's gaze softened with a hint of guilt. "Earlier, I lost control. That shouldn't have happened." The way he said it made her heart twist. She shook her head. "You weren't alone." Lightning split the sky, illuminating them in stark white. For a breath, neither moved. The bond stretched warm and tense between them, heavy with everything left unspoken. The storm around them echoed the turmoil inside, amplifying every feeling neither dared voice. The rain intensified, blurring the edges of the world until it felt like they stood alone in a pocket of storm and silence. Lyria wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from more than the cold. Azek's gaze swept over her, lingering on the mark glowing faintly beneath her cloak. The bond responded instantly, warming her skin in recognition. Azek exhaled slowly, fighting something inside him. "The bond is changing," he said quietly. "Growing." Lyria's pulse quickened. "Growing? How?" Azek hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's pulling us together faster than it should, stronger than I can resist." His voice faltered. "If we don't find a way to control it soon, it may decide for us." Lyria's breath hitched. The idea of the bond choosing anything for them made her stomach twist. Sarah pressed forward, listening intently, sensing Azek's turmoil through the connection. The thunder rolled across the mountains again, shaking the earth beneath them. Lyria stepped closer without meaning to, drawn by a force she couldn't deny. Azek's eyes darkened, a mixture of fear and something softer flickering through them. The storm raged on, echoing the rapid, dangerous growth of the bond weaving their fates together. Azek took a slow, deliberate step toward her, the rain cascading down his shoulders, as if the storm itself bowed to his presence. The bond coiled between them, thick and electric, tugging at Lyria's center with a strength that made her knees tremble. She didn't move away. She couldn't. Azek studied her face with an intensity that made heat rise beneath her skin. "There's something else," he said, voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Something I didn't want to admit earlier." Lyria's heart thudded painfully as she waited. Azek looked down briefly, jaw tightening. "Riven recognized you before I did. The bond didn't form by accident. It reacted to something older." The words seemed to vibrate in the storm-thickened air, heavy with meaning she didn't yet understand. Lyria's pulse quickened, fear threading through her veins. "Older how?" she whispered. Azek didn't answer immediately. His gaze returned to hers, raw and searching. The thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the ground beneath them. Rain dripped down his eyelashes, shining like silver in the moonlight. Whatever truth he held back seemed powerful enough to reshape everything she believed about herself, and about what the bond truly meant for them both. Lyria's breath caught, the world shrinking to the space between them as the storm raged on. "Older?" she echoed, voice unsteady. Azek nodded once, the movement heavy with unspoken weight. "Riven believes you are tied to an ancient lineage, one that hasn't appeared in generations." Lyria's stomach twisted. "That's impossible. I'm an Omega." Azek stepped closer, shaking his head. "Not to the bond. It reacted to your blood, your presence. It marked you because it recognized something hidden, even if you don't." Thunder cracked above them, sealing the moment with raw, undeniable power. The wind whipped her cloak wildly around her legs, but Lyria couldn't move, couldn't think. Sarah pressed forward inside her, for once silent, listening. Azek's brows drew together, concern shadowing his features. "I know this is much, but whatever you've been told about your worth, it might not be the truth." Lyria felt the sting of those words like a bruise reopening. Her whole life had been shaped by the belief that she was nothing. Invisible. Weak. But the bond didn't treat her as nothing. And neither did Azek. The realization trembled through her, fragile and terrifying, as the storm crashed around them in echoing waves. The storm finally eased by dawn, leaving Blackridge washed clean but trembling beneath a strange, heavy quiet. Lyria stepped outside the Omega quarters with sleep-deprived eyes, the bond already tugging faintly beneath her skin. It felt different this morning, warmer, steadier, yet threaded with an unmistakable urgency she didn't understand. Sarah stirred anxiously, whispering that something was coming, something the bond was trying to warn her about. As Lyria moved through the village paths, wolves watched her with sidelong glances, not with disdain as before, but with uncertainty. Something had changed after yesterday's shift. Everyone felt it, even if they wouldn't say it aloud. Lyria pulled her cloak tighter, her breath forming pale clouds in the crisp morning air. The sky above still simmered with leftover storm darkness, unsettled and heavy. The bond thrummed again, sharper this time, pulling her attention toward Moonspire Den. A warning. A summons. She wasn't sure which. Her footsteps quickened as the sensation grew, stretching through her chest like a hand trying to guide her. Something was happening. Something she needed to see. Around her, murmurs spread like ripples through the pack. Wolves glancing toward Moonspire, with unease neither of them could ignore any. Ozek stood at the highest balcony of Moonspire Den, overlooking the territory with a rigid stillness that betrayed the storm still raging inside him. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. The bond had kept him awake all night, pulsing steadily with Lyria's emotions, pulling at him with a force he could no longer pretend to ignore. Riven prowled restlessly beneath his skin, unsettled by something Ozek couldn't name. When the first light cut across the mountains, Ozek sensed it, a shift in the air, sharp and heavy, carrying the unmistakable scent of an approaching threat. His instincts bristled. Someone, or something, was nearing Blackridge with purpose he could feel in his bones. The early patrols hadn't reported anything unusual, but Ozek trusted the bond more than any scout. Lyria felt it too, Riven growled inside him. Azek clenched the railing, breath tightening as he stared northward. Dreven Corps had threatened their borders before, but never with this kind of boldness. If his scouts were here now, it meant one thing. They were preparing for something dangerous, something deliberate. And the bond, this impossible, growing bond, was sounding the alarm more clearly than any howl. Azek turned toward the stairs, urgency stiffening every step as he moved. Lyria reached the base of Moonspire Den just as the bond pulled taut, sharper than it had been in days, forcing her breath to hitch. She steadied herself with a palm against the cold stone wall, Sarah pushing forward in alarm. "Something's wrong," her wolf whispered. Lyria swallowed and climbed the steps, each one echoing with the bond's uneasy rhythm. At the entrance, Eldrick nearly collided with her, tension etched across his face. "Lyria? Good. I was coming to find you." Her pulse spiked. "What happened?" she asked. Eldrick exhaled sharply. "There's movement at the northern border. Dreven Corps' scouts. And Ozek felt it through the bond before any of us. He needs you in the hall. Now!" Lyria stared at him, stunned. The bond had warned her, but she hadn't realized it was reacting to an external threat. Sarah crouched low inside her, violent instinct flaring for the first time in Lyria's life. She followed Eldrick quickly, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. The deeper she moved into Moonspire, the louder the bond became, pulsing with both Ozek's urgency and something else. Something like fear. Whatever awaited her in the hall, it was big enough to shake the Alpha himself. The moment Lyria entered the central hall, she felt Ozek's presence hit her like a sudden shift in gravity. He stood near the war table with the senior warriors gathered around him, but the instant she stepped inside, his attention snapped toward her. The bond surged, warm and urgent, pulling tight between them as if recognizing danger before either spoke. Azek closed the distance quickly. "You felt it?" he said, voice low but edged with tension. Lyria nodded, her pulse fluttering. "The northern border. Something's there." Murmurs rose among the warriors, but Ozek lifted a hand, silencing them. "Dreven Corps' scouts have crossed into our sightline. Not by accident." Lyria stiffened, a chill running down her spine. Dreven's reputation was sharp and ruthless. Even Omegas whispered of him with fear. Ozek stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If he senses the bond, if he suspects what you might be, he will come for you first." The words hollowed out Lyria's breath. Sarah bristled with instinctive defiance. Azek's jaw tightened as he searched her eyes. "I won't let that happen. But we need to move. Now." Lyria nodded, steeling herself as the bond pulsed with fierce urgency. "We prepare together now." Lyria stepped closer to the war table. The map of Blackridge stretched beneath lantern light as rain drummed steadily against the stone walls. The bond pulsed harder now, responding to the tension between every wolf in the hall. Sarah pressed close to the surface, sharper and more alive than Lyria had ever felt her. "It feels wrong," Lyria whispered, "like something is pushing toward us." Ozek's gaze darkened. "Because it is." He pointed toward the northern border marked on the map. Drevencor's scouts aren't just testing the boundary, they're searching. Lyria's breath hitched. For me? Azek didn't flinch. For whatever the bond awakened, and they won't stop until they know exactly what it is. A murmur rippled through the room as warriors exchanged wary glances. The air thickened with dread. Lyria's fingers curled against the table edge, grounding herself as the bond pressed insistently through her chest. Azek stepped beside her, his presence steadying. "This changes our strategy," he said, voice low. "We can't outrun this. We confront it on our terms." Lyria lifted her chin, a spark of resolve igniting beneath her fear. Whatever Draven sought, she would no longer face it alone. They would meet him together. The warning horn echoed across Blackridge, just as dawn began to lift the night from the mountains. Its low, trembling call sending wolves spilling from their dens in confusion. Lyria froze mid-step outside the Moonspire entrance, the bond tightening violently in her chest, as if grasped by an unseen hand. Sarah surged upward with a growl, bristling with instinctive alarm. "Azek!" Lyria breathed, already moving before the thought fully formed. She sprinted toward the inner courtyard, where warriors gathered in tense clusters, their ears pinned and hackles raised. The air vibrated with unease, thick enough to taste. She shoved through the crowd, the bond's pull sharpening until it felt like invisible fingers dragging her forward. Azek was here. She could feel his emotions colliding through the connection in jagged waves. Focus, tension, and beneath them, something colder. Fear. The realization punched the breath from her lungs. When she broke through the final ring of warriors, she saw him, standing rigid, drenched in early morning mist, eyes fixed on the northern ridge as if expecting it to split open. Lyria drew a shaking breath, the bond throbbing painfully. Something was coming, something powerful, and every instinct in her braced for whatever approached them, bracing for whatever approached them. Azek stood at the center of the courtyard, issuing rapid orders as patrol leaders rushed toward him, their urgency sharp in the cold morning air. Though his expression remained carved and controlled, the bond thrummed with the tension he tried to hide. The moment he sensed Lyria, his gaze snapped to her, storm-colored eyes blazing with urgency. "It's Draven," he said, voice low and clipped. "He's closer than we expected." Lyria's breath caught. How close? Azek hesitated, just long enough to make her stomach twist. Close enough that the northern scouts had to fall back before confirming his full numbers. But he's not hiding. He wants us to know he's coming. Lyria felt the blood drain from her face. Drevencor's name was spoken like a warning in every territory north of the mountains. A rogue alpha with a reputation for cruelty, ambition, and an unnatural sensitivity to rare bloodlines. Azek stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "He's testing us, waiting for a reaction." The bond pulsed sharply, echoing Azek's dread. Lyria wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady the tremor crawling through her bones. If Draven was already this close, then whatever he wanted. He believed it was inside Blackridge. The courtyard buzzed with tense preparation as warriors armed themselves, but Lyria felt only the pounding of the bond guiding her forward. Azek reached for her, hesitated, but still touched her arm lightly, grounding both of them. "The bond reacted before the horn," he murmured. "It felt him, like a shadow pushing against our borders." Lyria swallowed hard. Why would Draven trigger the bond? Azek's jaw clenched. Because he isn't looking for Blackridge. His eyes lifted to hers, heavy with a truth she wasn't ready to face. "He's looking for you." The world tilted. Lyria shook her head in disbelief. "He doesn't even know me." But Sarah growled softly, sensing something she didn't understand. Azek stepped closer, voice dropping. "Draven has been searching for an awakened lineage for years. When Riven marked you, it sent a pulse through the region. Alphas like Dreven feel shifts in power. Lyria's stomach twisted violently. So he thinks I'm part of that? Azek nodded grimly. He thinks you're the key to whatever he's been hunting. Lyria stumbled back a step, breath unsteady. Azek followed, expression fierce. He's not getting to you. The bond surged warmly between them, a fragile but powerful promise. He is hunting the one the bond revealed first. Azek guided Lyria toward the war table inside Moonspire Hall, the heavy wooden doors slamming shut behind them as warriors took their positions outside. The moment the hall sealed, the bond surged again, sharper than before, as if reacting to a threat that crept closer with every heartbeat. Azek paced once, then stopped abruptly, hands braced against the edge of the table. Draven isn't approaching blindly, he said. He knows something about you, something even you don't. Lyria stiffened, pulse knocking unevenly against her ribs. What could he possibly know? Azek hesitated, jaw flexing with frustration. Your lineage, your bloodline, something about the bond's reaction makes him think you're the key to what he's been hunting for years. Lyria shook her head, disbelieving. I was born an Omega. No pack ever wanted me. Azek stepped closer, eyes fierce. And yet your wolf reacts to threats before mine does. Your presence calmed a forced shift. The bond strengthened overnight, without either of us feeding it. Lyria swallowed hard, her breath trembling. That doesn't make me special. Azek leaned in, voice rough. It makes you dangerous. To him. The bond pulsed again, hot and urgent. A warning she could not outrun anymore. Lyria stepped closer to the table, her fingers trembling as she steadied herself against its worn surface. The lantern flames flickered wildly, sending jagged shadows racing across the stone walls, as if the hall itself sensed the danger drawing near. If he's coming for me, she whispered, what does he want? Azek's expression darkened, his voice low. Power. Influence. Control over a lineage he believes can shift the balance between packs. Lyria's breath stuttered as the truth settled over her like ice. She had spent her whole life ignored, dismissed, treated as nothing. And now someone wanted to tear apart Blackridge to claim her? The bond throbbed painfully, reacting to her fear. Azek reached out, brushing his fingers against her wrist in a rare gesture of grounding. He believes you're awakened, he murmured. He believes your blood holds something ancient. Lyria's knees wobbled. But I don't understand any of this. Azek's jaw hardened. You don't have to. Not alone. The warmth from his touch steadied her just enough for Sarah to settle inside her chest. Dreven will come for what he thinks he can control, Azek continued quietly. But he won't touch you while I breathe. The bond won't allow it, and neither will I. The northern sky tore open with the first war howl, a sound so deep it rattled the stones beneath Lyria's feet. The ridge overlooking the border was alive with movement as warriors rushed into formation, their breath rising in pale clouds against the cold dawn. Lyria stood beside Azek, the wind slashing across her cheeks, carrying the sharp metallic scent of an approaching battle. The bond inside her surged, hot and urgent, tightening like a coil that pulled her closer to him with every heartbeat. Sarah pressed at the edges of her consciousness, hackles raised, sensing danger with a clarity that made Lyria's pulse stutter. From the tree line ahead, Dreven Kor's wolves emerged, dark shapes moving with eerie precision, their eyes gleaming with hunger and intent. Azek, Lyria whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising storm of footsteps. He didn't look at her, his gaze locked forward, shoulders rigid. He's here. The words trembled through the bond, laced with a darkness she had never felt from him before. Lyria swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe as the world narrowed to the space between two armies about to collide. The air thickened, waiting for the moment everything would finally break open. Dreven Kor stepped forward from his ranks like a shadow given flesh, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, his presence slicing through the battlefield with predatory confidence. Lyria felt his gaze lock onto her instantly, hot and invasive, and the bond recoiled as if burned. Azek shifted subtly in front of her, one arm extended in a silent gesture of protection, though his voice remained steady. "Do not engage first," he murmured to his warriors, though the command was meant for Lyria as well. Dreven lifted his chin, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Blackridge," he called out, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. "You have something that belongs to me." The growl that tore from Azek's chest vibrated through the ground itself, deep and warning. "She is not yours," he answered. "She will never be yours." The smile widened as Draven took another step closer. "We will see." Lyria's hands shook, but Sarah surged forward inside her, refusing to back down. The bond pulsed with Azek's fury, with her fear, with something else rising fast, power she didn't recognize. It gathered beneath her skin like a storm waiting to be unleashed, humming with unfamiliar purpose she had no idea how to control. The air between the two armies vibrated with tension as Draven raised a single hand, his wolves shifting restlessly behind him. Lyria felt the bond throb painfully, warning her, pulling her backward, even as something inside her leaned forward. Azek caught her wrist, grounding her with the heat of his touch. "Do not move unless I say so," he whispered, though his eyes stayed locked on Draven. Draven tilted his head, his gaze sharpening. "You feel it, don't you?" he called to Lyria. "The blood inside you waking up." Lyria's heart hammered, confusion and dread twisting together. "I don't know what you're talking about," she shouted back, though her voice wavered. Draven's smile sharpened. "But you will. The bond marked you for a reason. It recognized what lies dormant in you, even if you pretend you don't sense it." Azek stepped forward, blocking Draven's view. "Enough." A violent gust of wind whipped across the ridge, scattering leaves and dust. Then Draven's voice dropped, dark and certain. "She is the key, and I will have her." The ground trembled as his wolves surged forward a single step, testing Blackridge's line, daring them to break. Lyria felt power rising inside her again. Lyria staggered as another pulse of raw energy surged through her, nearly knocking the breath from her lungs. Azek turned toward her, eyes widening as he felt it through the bond. A force neither of them understood building fast. "Lyria, stay behind me," he ordered, but the command trembled with uncertainty. Draven's wolves snarled, sensing the shift in power, their claws ripping through the frost-covered earth. Draven himself stepped forward, gaze locked on her like a predator sighting prey. "There it is," he murmured, his voice dripping with hunger. "The awakening." Sarah pressed hard against Lyria's senses, pushing, urging, demanding. She let the rising force move through her. Lyria shook her head, trying to steady her breath. "Azek, something's wrong. I can't hold it." The bond tightened sharply, like a rope pulling taut, pain flaring down her spine. Azek caught her shoulders, steadying her as she swayed. "You don't have to hold it. Just breathe. Focus on me." Draven laughed, the sound echoing across the ridge like cracked stone. "Let it out, girl. Show them what you are." Lyria squeezed her eyes shut as the world tilted, light gathering beneath her skin like fire begging to be released. She felt everything trembling on. A roar tore across the battlefield as Draven raised his arm, and his wolves surged forward in a deadly wave. Azek stepped in front of Lyria, shifting mid-movement, bones cracking as Riven exploded through him in a burst of silver-gray fury. Blackridge warriors shifted in unison, forming a protective wall, but the bond yanked violently inside Lyria's chest, hard enough to make her gasp. The force inside her snapped free. Light burst from her skin, not bright but deep. like embers igniting in the dark. The wind howled around her, swirling with the sudden rise of her power. Azek, now fully wolf, skidded to a halt beside her, snarling in alarm. Driven froze mid-charge, eyes widening with triumph. "Yes," he growled. "There it is." Lyria's knees buckled as the earth beneath her feet cracked, thin lines of glowing heat spiderwebbing through the ground. Sarah roared within her, not in fear, but in release. "Lyria!" Azek's voice reached her through the bond, desperate, fierce. "Stay with me!" But the power kept climbing, spiraling upward, drawn to the bond, drawn to Azek, drawn even to Draven's reaching presence. Lyria screamed as the world split into light, heat, and instinct until nothing in her felt human. Lyria's scream rippled through the battlefield as the world dissolved into blinding heat and pulsing light. The force erupting from her core surged outward in a sweeping wave, knocking snow, earth, and even wolves off their feet. Azek, shifted fully into Riven's massive form, dug his claws into the ground, bracing himself as the blast struck him. But instead of shoving him back, the bond yanked him forward toward her, as if the power recognized him alone. The light around Lyria twisted, rising in spirals of shimmering ember-red energy that scorched the air itself. Driven skidded to a halt mid-charge, eyes wide with stunned hunger as the power he'd hunted for years finally ignited before him. "Awakened," he whispered. Sarah roared inside Lyria, her voice layered, ancient, echoing through every bone. Lyria stumbled forward, barely aware of the trembling earth beneath her, or the gasps of Blackridge warriors scrambling to regain their footing. She felt everything and nothing at once, the bond, the power, Azek's fierce presence anchoring her through the storm. Azek lunged to her side, fur bristling, Riven's snarl vibrating through the air as he shielded her from Draven's advancing wolves. The dawn sky shook with the force awakening inside. Draven recovered first. With a roar that split the ridge, he launched himself forward, shifting mid-air into a monstrous black wolf, twice as large as any warrior behind him. His pack surged after him, emboldened by the sight of their alpha descending upon Lyria like a living nightmare. Azek tore away from Lyria's side with a snarl, crashing into Draven before he could reach her. Two colossal wolves colliding with bone-shaking force. The impact sent tremors through the mountain, snow falling in thick curtains from the trees. Lyria staggered, the remaining embers of her power flickering wildly beneath her skin, searching for direction she couldn't give. Sarah pushed hard. "Move! Help him!" But Lyria's legs trembled, the world spinning as exhaustion crashed through her. Blackridge warriors clashed with Draven's pack in a burst of teeth and claws, the air filled with snarls, growls, and the sharp scent of blood. Azek and Draven rolled across the ground, slashing, biting, each strike fueled by rage and instinct. Lyria reached out helplessly, the bond screaming through her. Azek's pain, his determination, his desperate need for her to stay conscious. She forced herself upright, each breath burning, knowing the fight's outcome depended on what she chose. She stumbled forward, each step a battle. The bond burned hot inside her, not painful, but insistent, pushing her toward Azek with a pull she could no longer resist. A flash of silver fur streaked across her vision as Riven broke free from Draven's hold for a heartbeat, only to be slammed back into the ground by the massive black wolf. Lyria cried out, the sound torn from her chest. The bond reacted violently, flaring outward in a spiral of ember-colored energy that whipped across the battlefield. Wolves on both sides stumbled as the surge passed through them, but Draven only grinned wider, feeding on the display. "More," he growled, his voice distorted through his wolf's muzzle. "Let it consume you." Lyria shook her head, vision blurring. "I don't want this!" she shouted. The bond pulsed, Azek's voice whispering through her mind. rough and desperate. "Lyria, stay with me." Her knees buckled, but she forced herself upright, fueled by the bond's raw urgency. Driven lunged past Riven, jaws gaping, aiming directly for Lyria's throat. Sarah roared inside her, rising in a surge of ancient instinct Lyria could no longer suppress. Heat exploded through her limbs as the dormant power within her finally answered. Lyria's vision blurred as Draven's massive form lunged toward her, black fur bristling, jaws gaping wide. Instinct, not thought, took over. Her hands lifted, and the ember-red light surged outward in a wall of heat that slammed into Draven midair. He was thrown backward, crashing into the ground with a thunderous crack that echoed across the ridge. Sarah roared triumphantly inside her, but the force of the release drove Lyria to her knees. Azek, Riven, charged to her side, positioning himself between her and Draven's recovering form, snarling so violently the earth vibrated beneath his paws. Draven rose slowly, shaking snow and dirt from his pelt, his eyes glowing with fury and obsession. "You are mine," he growled, stepping forward again. Lyria forced herself upright, legs trembling, hands shaking with leftover power. "I belong to no one," she whispered. The bond pulsed fiercely, Azek's presence wrapping around her like a shield. Draven lunged again, but this time Riven met him head-on, the collision sending a shockwave through the battlefield. Lyria staggered backward, breath ragged as power flickered unpredictably beneath her skin. She felt the bond tug hard, warning her, calling her, before she understood what it needed her to do. She stepped forward, answering. The moment she stepped forward, the bond detonated between her and Azek. No longer a connection, but a force. It ripped through the battlefield in a ripple of glowing heat, threading itself through Riven's strength and Lyria's rising power. Draven lunged again, but this time Lyria didn't flinch. She lifted her hands, and the ember light streamed outward, meeting his attack with a blast that sent him skidding across the ridge. Azek seized the opening. Riven launched himself at Draven, slamming him into the fractured earth with devastating force. The ground cracked beneath them, dust and snow exploding upward as the two alphas collided in a final, brutal struggle. Lyria felt every moment through the bond, Riven's pain, his determination, his refusal to submit. Summoning the last of her strength, she pressed her palms to the ground. The ember heat spread outward, forming a barrier of molten energy that trapped Draven, weakening him. Azek tore free, jaws flashing. One final strike, one final roar, and Draven collapsed, defeated. The battlefield fell silent. Snow drifted softly around them as the bond loosened its grip, settling warm and steady in Lyria's chest. Azek shifted back slowly, reaching for her with trembling hands as she fell into his arms. "If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of this pack now. Tell me in the comments, should this story get a part 2? Should we follow Lyria and Azek after the battle? Do you want an epilogue, a new villain, a deeper dive into Lyria's awakened lineage? I'm reading every single comment. And if this story made your heart race even once, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter in this universe. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this story with me. And until next time, stay wild, stay brave, and I'll meet you in the next story.